Were you part of a gifted and talented program as a child? And if so, do you have a hard time remembering what happened to you within this program? If any of this sounds interesting to you, then you should stick around for this episode of the Launchpad Podcast. This is a part 2 with my buddy Jake from JakeKnowsNothing, talking about what happened to us in these gifted and talented programs that seem to have a lot of eerie sort of commonalities, and there's thousands of people right now waking up and remembering sort of what has happened to them. This is something Jake has been doing a deep dive on for quite some time on all of his channels, so if you haven't checked him out, you definitely should. He is a soul brother. And if you haven't checked out our company, Minnesota Nice Ethnobotanicals, you should go do that. We got the highest quality Amanita, Kava, Blue Lotus products on the market, all with ethical sourcing, great prices, quick shipping. So yeah, when you support that business, you support me and the podcast. Other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. This is a long conversation between me and Jake, but we really figured some important shit out. So yeah, peace out, much love. And also, neither me or Jake is suicidal. Bye. So like, what is the TikTok alternative for you to continue to like, because I know that you're really big on the gate stuff right now, and we're going to talk about that like a lot, obviously, within this episode. But like, there's a lot more about you that's going to come through than just the gate stuff as well, too. The gate is just like this one blip on your sort of like, you're like a channeler, dude. You know, some people channel in this funny way of like, and not that's funny. I think it's a lot of times very valid, and there's a lot of fiduciary involved. But, you know, those people have the channeling actual, like, sort of practices where they're, quote unquote, channeling another deity. Sometimes they speak in our language. Sometimes they speak in other languages. Sometimes they write things down really quickly. But I say you're a channeler in terms of, like, there's some interesting kind of big picture divine shit that's coming through you in a lot of different ways and stuff right now.
Right. And I made a video about that recently, kind of...
Yeah.
A little bit shitting on Bashar, like Daryl, that guy who channels this entity known as Bashar. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
I saw your video about him.
Yeah, and I was just like,
and I've seen him before.
I'm sorry, I still have this cold going on, so I'm sorry if I'm like sniffling.
Oh, you're fine, dude. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like, what's interesting is, I should have looked into this further, but whenever I saw your video about Bashar, I had seen him before somewhere. I don't know where from, but I've seen him before. I wasn't like fully aware of his whole like kind of platform and his message, but I've seen that fucking man somewhere else before.
Right. And his stuff gets pushed hard on all platforms. Like no matter where I show up, a Bashar video pops up for me. And when I first discovered him, I was like, oh, this dude is dope. Like he's saying a lot of the things that I have already discovered for myself. Like he's pretty on point with stuff. But the more I watched it, the more I was like, this is so performative. This is so weird. Like as someone who does channel things, like, yeah, I have these experiences all the time, almost nonstop, but I don't have to do like this, all right, like that's so weird. Why are you doing that? And I know it's for views. I know it's this character that he's developed, and
to me, it reminds me of the guru trap that we see coming in a lot of different ways right now, and expressed a lot through this esoteric, spiritual, psychedelic society emerging. There's this guru trap, and I think what happens is, man, and tell me if you agree with this, but I think this could be kind of like part of the thing that's happening with this Bashar guy, but like, is the guru trap where there is like these people, a lot of people who go through these different rites of passages and these different obstacles and these different healing modalities, and they find ways to heal themselves, and they really do heal themselves in a lot of ways, and they feel this desire to share that with others and to share that with the world, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I think where the trap comes in is that they get especially if they become successful with it, there's a certain character that solidifies, and they don't give themselves a space anymore to actually work on themselves. They stop working on themselves and stop actually continuing to explore the mystery, that's mysterious tremendum, and being, but they just solidify as this like beacon of like, I figured it out in a way.
Exactly. As soon as you elevate yourself to that platform or stance, you're so limited, because now you're like, as soon as you position yourself as the guy that everyone should be looking to for answers, then you stop asking questions because you're so focused on answering everyone from this place of authority. And it's like, No, like the best way to go about this is to, like I said it before in like that piece of content about Bashar specifically, like the only really acceptable way to react to this phenomenon is to just be dumbfounded, be like, holy shit, this is possible, people can do this, and then try and convince everyone else to do it for themselves so that we could compare notes and stop stumbling on our own ego. But there's so few people that are willing to do that because it, like as soon as you find these deeper truths on different plant medicines or meditation and you can heal yourself, like it's really hard to stifle that ego and shove it down, because
Mm-hmm.
you are in some respects like one step ahead in this certain understanding. And you have to just keep reminding yourself, like, literally every single person's perspective is equally as valuable as mine. Even the people who know nothing about spirituality or other dimensions, like, that is just as valuable to the path that you're going down. And like that all calls to this deeper truth of us being this kind of like one consciousness, one entity splitting itself into a million different perspectives. Like, we wouldn't be having that other perspective if it wasn't valuable. So stop shitting on other people who don't care about this stuff. I don't know, it's very interesting to me, this trap.
Mm-hmm. And like what I'm thinking about right now, maybe this is a little bit too woo-woo and out there, but
Never.
like if this is happening a lot at the individual level of this sort of like guru trap, and I think there's a lot of reasons why this is coming through, but I think ultimately it's this mixture of this really innate, mysterious, psychedelic thing that exists within all of us that's really being heavily brought to the surface and expressed right now within this like weird sort of like prison like fucking society thing that we've built for ourselves, you know. And so there's a lot of like weird expressions of this coming through, right? I think it's part of the reason why the guru thing kind of exists a lot right now within our society at the individual level. But if that's existing at the individual level, how is that being expressed and has that been expressed as a collective, maybe say like as a nation, right? Like this like this
Right.
thought, this notion of, well, we figured it out, and so I'm going to profit off of telling you how it's done, and like you come into my system and my
Mm-hmm.
courses, and I'm going to help you out, and really like, you know, on the whole, in the meanwhile, the entire time, because you're trying to really solidify this control over others and solidify this character and this narrative as the leader and things like that, you stop actually working on yourself internally. Holy shit, dude. Maybe that's kind
Right.
of what we've been doing as a collective. We've been in somewhat of a guru trap.
1000%. And there's
Yeah.
another element to that I would like to speak on, but also
Yeah.
like I that's one thing that I've been trying to work through in my own like personal understanding of things, because I believe that you deserve money. Like, everything is an energy transaction and money is no different. And people who provide a service or offer interesting commentary deserve to support their family. Like, energy that I or you are taking away from our own family and our own household in exchange to give out to other people to hopefully help them in their own lives, that deserves energy in return. That deserves, like, what would be the price that you pay for time sacrificed with your son, right? Like, that has a number, that there you do deserve something in return. But I do think that there's a different way to go about it than this weird guru stance. And that's what I'm trying to kind of figure out in my own life and my own business and content creation, is how can I be okay with accepting money and trying to earn a living and support my family while doing something that I think might be beneficial without accidentally causing harm and becoming some guru person that like that's a false narrative, really. Like, I don't see myself as a guru. I'm just a guy, and I'm just like profoundly in awe of these things, and I just want everyone else to know about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fine line, because so many people are easily swayed by someone who seems like they have answers. And even though they're just on a different path than you, if their path sounds and looks better than yours, then you're automatically going to follow that guy. And even
Yeah.
just the terminology of social media, like, I have followers, like, it's so cult like, it's such a devious trap.
Yeah, and a lot of people, and I almost cringe when I hear somebody say that they want to become a like a creator, like content creator or an influencer, I guess I should say. Like there's, and then not that I think that's wrong. I think we're struggling. We're just finding the words as like a society right now to express all these things and stuff like that. But there is like, and this is, there's some people who I follow, quote unquote, follow and look at online who I truly like. I feel like they have, they've developed this alchemization, and they're actually kind of like putting art out there that is valuable, and they've distilled down information for people sometimes that's valuable and making it a good ripple. And like, I really like things like that. But then there's a lot of people falling into this trap of just appeasing to this like system and algorithm. And you see a lot of people who have a larger amount of followers and even get a lot of views, but they make like nothing for money. But then you see people who have like a small amount of followers sometimes who are making a full-time living doing this shit as well too. And
Right.
what it ultimately comes down to is, I think, the people who are creating real art and real value for others, that, you know what I'm saying? And that's the, and so, yeah, I'm completely with you about like, you know, I think that, there is this law of reciprocity within this field of things. Like, I think there is an energetic exchange, and I think that it should be, you know, fair for sure. And I think what happens a lot of times with the guru trap too is people who have these mystical moments and reach this mountaintop and have to come back down from the mountaintop. They see the trap in the system that we've set for ourselves, and there's this desire to want to break out of it. And so like I think that sometimes this plays out subconsciously. They don't always bring this to the conscious surface and really grapple with this aspect of themselves, but they go this guru route because they know it's a way that they can kind of like escape the system thing, right?
100%.
You know, so
And
a lot of interesting aspects.
Another thing that I have really been thinking about and trying to break down is, I feel like trying to be careful how I word this. I think that there are purposeful traps set up in the collective conscious to find people who are trying to break out, find people who are trying to get to the deeper truths of things. And I don't know if that is something that is orchestrated by a government, or if that is an aspect of some matrix simulation that we live in. But it does seem like there are very specific ideologies and people in very strategic positions that will automatically capture people who are on this path. And that's things like Bashar. I'm not saying for sure he's like some industry plant or something, but it seems to me, I keep seeing this pattern of people who are doing the same. They're into meditation. They're trying to figure out why we're alive. What is this reality? They're experimenting with different plant medicines. And then they consistently stumble into these same areas that turn out to be false or misdirection.
It's like their new political team as well too. I really like this observation that you're making, because I'm sitting here thinking about it. And like, I've been drenched in this space now, it feels like, for several years, like by podcasting with people like you and the network and the business and things, and going to different events. And like, so like, I've met a lot of people within this quote unquote like psychedelic or esoteric or spiritual space, and they're lovely people, very interesting, some of my favorite people to be around. But it's a wild, crazy spectrum of these people, right? And
right,
a lot of them do fall into this trap that you're describing of like, oh, I can tell you have like healed and you've worked on yourself on different aspects and you are knowledgeable in different ways. But it's like, oh, there's also like this kink in you where like you have a certain team around, like whether like this quantum energy bracelet. And if you're not on this shit, dude, like you like, bro, like, holy shit, what are you? And like, they really like it's this, once again, this sort of expression of like, it's like you got caught in the weeds of it, and you're not continuing to really kind of branch out and work on yourself. And there's like this certain
no, for sure. It's to me, like I always put things in the perspective of cults, right? Because that's what I'm very familiar with that. And so it seems like that's what's being set up, is these different cult ideologies to hook people, so they can't get too far. They can't experience the full kind of like virgin truth of it. They get caught up in some quantum energy medallion, or even like broader ideologies, like I think star seeds, that's a hot topic. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason I know that I'm onto something is anytime you call those ideas or people into question, their followers come at you, and it is a very cult like response. Like, this is not to be questioned, this is gospel. And anytime
Mm-hmm.
any idea is propped up like that, I'm like, ugh, like that's
It's
never what
religion.
you want to
It's a
do.
cult. It's religion. It's a
Right,
cult. I'm with you, dude.
right,
100%.
right.
Yeah,
Anytime
this
you
is
see that
very.
reaction in people, you're like, like that might be a blind spot for you. If you're reacting emotionally rather than considering an opposing viewpoint and looking inward and be like, oh, maybe I'm missing something. Anytime you shut that off and you're just attack mode, that's
Mm-hmm.
a problem. You need to
It's ego.
reassess what. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are strategic things set up specifically for just like in the political sphere, where there's all these different weird ideologies and prominent people on all different sides of the aisle that you will get caught up in. And no matter
Mm-hmm.
how far you start to wake up to the fact that it's all bullshit, there's going to be another person or ideology there to catch you and kind of misdirect you again. And you see that like far left,
Yeah.
far right, literally everywhere. And I'm speaking from experience. Like, I have been caught up in all of these things, in the political sphere, in the spirituality sphere. I
Yeah.
keep I keep stumbling into these cult like ideologies, and just because of who I am as a person, I always consider everything. Like, I always say that I like to try on different hats, and so I will put on the hat of star seeds, or this channeler who channels Bashar, just to see how it fits, just to see what that's like, to see if it aligns with what I believe in. And I consistently am finding myself ripping that hat off again, because it's like, once I get to the heart of it and I start to really think about it, I'm like, oh no, this is just another cult. This is just another misdirection.
Yeah, and I like this observation once again of like these misdirects in place within the quote unquote maybe system or maybe the collective,
Right,
that
right,
really throw people once they've broken through the initial barrier. It's kind of like this extra safety net of like, okay, yeah, we're gonna steer you this way now, and
right.
maybe like there is a lot of the misdirect going on, like you say, but then also simultaneously maybe there's some potential. It's not necessarily misdirecting. It's directing it in a way of, or now you're going to utilize this, the breaking through the barrier for this purpose, maybe some sort of like program or something like that,
Right,
right?
right,
And
right.
so yeah, I want to get into all this gate stuff with you
Well,
today,
I mean,
but
this is actually like a perfect segue into the gate stuff, because
mhm.
one of the biggest things that has reinforced that idea in me is researching the gate program and seeing how many of those people who went through that experience as a child end up going down the same exact paths. Like, they all have I just like that they were all, a lot of them are super familiar and are deep followers of Bashar. So many of them have gone on to explore the Gateway tapes, which is a whole other rabbit hole that we can go down later.
Mhm.
So many of them are like Reiki or tarot card readers, and it's fascinating to me, because to me it seems like those things were set up there waiting to catch you. Like, if we conceptualize the gate program as this kind of like funnel searching program, trying to find people who are spiritually inclined or psychic or whatever, then if they deemed that you were not usable, you weren't malleable enough, you were too obstinate, they couldn't hire you later on in adulthood, then they set up these ideologies to catch you later on and misdirect you. And it's like, it's kind of scary how consistent it is. Like, even just looking through new followers of mine, it'll be like Sarah, Reiki healer. And I'm just like, again, like, how many of my fucking followers are doing the exact same line of work? That is an interesting pattern, to say the least.
Very interesting pattern. I've tried to find a lot of different ways to express this about the current sort of like psychedelic renaissance. It's like, why are there so many of these? Like, how many second comings of Jesus are going to come through in this fucking renaissance? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because it's like, but okay, so I know you just expressed a lot of, and that's one of the really interesting aspects to this entire thing to me, this entire gate program. And we broke down a lot of that within the first episode. of this series, and I highly recommend people go check that out here on my channel if you haven't seen the first episode about the GATE program. But these sort of commonalities that exist amongst the people that were in it, right? And like you and I even broke down some of our shared experiences and commonalities and things, and that was really eerie in a lot of ways. But I just had this thought pop in my mind as you're describing some of these commonalities once again. I know you're just kind of collecting anecdotal data, but you've had a lot of conversations, I'm sure, with people who have reached out to you directly through TikTok or commented on your videos or whatever it is. Is there any sort of correlation? Have a lot of these people like taken or experimented with psychedelic drugs?
Huge amounts.
Interesting.
Huge amounts. Yeah. And that was actually before this really started blowing up and there was a lot of voices in the mix. That was one of the things on the list that stood out to me, because for years people have sort of been trying to research this and put together these commonalities that we seem to have. And one of the things that struck me as really odd is it seems like people who went through the GATE program would not necessarily experiment with drugs and alcohol in their teen years, like what is normal, but they would get heavily into it in their 20s and then stop in their 30s. And I was like, that's literally me. Like, how is that possible? That seemed like such a weird characteristic to put out there, but I was like, that's my life. Like, how does it know that? Excuse me. And we're not alone. Like, that is a big factor to this. That's one of the paths that people find themselves on.
Interesting, because I will say, whenever I was in high school, like I smoked quite a bit of cannabis. I really liked cannabis, and I had like experimented with a few different things like pain pills and then alcohol, but I didn't like those things, and so I never really like did them hardly ever. It was just some things I really experimented with, but like I stuck with cannabis quite a bit through high school. I loved cannabis, but then it was really when I got to about 18, 19, 20, 21-ish when I started really doing like a lot of psychedelics and dissociatives and things like that, and really got into that whole sphere, like heavily obsessed with it. And I've slowed down a lot. I'm only in my mid-20s, but that somewhat tracks with my pattern as well too. And I've even expressed this in previous podcast episodes, this sort of similar pattern that I've seen within psychonauts play out. And I think there's a lot of different factors that play into that particular pattern, but it is an interesting thing that is being expressed also within the GATE program kids as well, right, too. Yeah, dude. Oh, okay.
And it seems like I'll just throw this idea out there. I don't have it's all anecdotal stuff, right? So I don't have a smoking gun on this topic. I just have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people reaching out to me with their stories. And I can't help but wonder if some of the reason why we gravitate towards these things later in life is because we were introduced to them as children without our knowledge. And I'll use the example of the Gateway tapes, which we can get into now or later. But one of the things that I've discovered through this content creation journey on this topic is that those Gateway tapes were what were used on a lot of us in the program as children, and they were called a hearing test, but they were actually hypnosis tapes designed to get us to astral project and remote view. And almost everyone who went through that as a kid had no idea what was going on, but then randomly later in life, they stumble on the Gateway tapes and they pick it up again. And a lot of them are freaked out by it because they so deeply, viscerally remember that man's voice and the beeps and noises to induce this state of consciousness.
I hadn't remembered it until you posted that video, dude. I wanted to wait till this conversation to tell you that so I could hit you with that, but I didn't remember it till you posted
that was terrifying, dude. That's terrifying.
It was simultaneously both the noise, like the frequency, whatever it was, and the headphones, seeing the headphones visually.
Right. Right. And his voice, like it felt so familiar to me. And I thought that I was crazy. I genuinely expected to get no traction on that video because I was like, this is a shot in the dark. There's no way. And dude, now I have millions of views on that topic alone. And that's not like a brag. That's like, I'm kind of freaked out by that because I did not expect that reaction from that many people who were like, yeah, dude, I remember listening to that in my school, in my computer room, in the nurse's station. And they told me it was a hearing test. And I was like, that audio is directly ripped from a hypnosis tape. So like, that was not a hearing test. I promise you that if you remember that audio, you were not getting a hearing test. And I can't explain how many people go on to listen to them again without that knowledge. Like, no one knew that was what we were listening to as kids, but how are we all gravitating towards it again in our adult lives? That is odd to me. And I wonder if that is the same thing with psychedelics.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is a very similar thing with psychedelics. I've tried to find different artistic ways to express that, but it's like this place of like, I think it's like we're phoning home. Like, I think we know this place, you know, other people have expressed that about it too. Like, it felt like, yeah, it was a new experience in this lifetime. It was different and new, but it was also like hyper sobriety. It was like I went home, this gift of remembrance. And yeah, with the sort of like gate program, even with the shadow banning kind of going on with your shit, it's still being expressed through. It's gaining traction because so many people see it and probably resonate with it, and it's unlocking certain memories within themselves. They're wanting to share it with their friends, even though TikTok is limiting the amount that people can do that with your videos.
Right.
You know, yeah, it's fed a lot of traffic into my YouTube channel as well too. People coming to see our first episode on this particular topic is my most successful podcast video ever. It's like 2.5 thousand right now on YouTube. And yeah, dude, it's people are really, and going through the comments on that video is really interesting. Almost every day, dude, there's somebody else. I wish I had the time to. I really try and check up on it and interact with it. But there's people commenting fucking every day on that video about their experiences with it as well too.
Yeah, man, it really hits home for people.
And so like there's this combination of, so what I've described this, right, about, there's a lot of arguments around what particular maybe ceremonies or rituals or sacraments consisted of, you know what I'm saying, with like soma and the mysteries at Eleusis and all these things. And like we can argue about that all day long, and I'm really interested to see the archaeological data and different things poke through and us to try and piece that together. But ultimately what I think it probably fucking was, dude, is very similar to us, was this very kind of interesting, unique alchemization that was once again unique to like their society at the time and things like that. And so when you're describing, and this seems to be a big commonality that keeps poking through at the gate thing, is this mysterious sort of like liquid or like whatever that people are getting, candies and things like that, potentially being drugged or tested on or whatever it was, right? Maybe that in combination with like the fucking, you know, hypnosis tapes. Like
Right.
there's
And
some weird.
it's not just the liquid. Like that's one thing that the majority of people remember, but I can't even tell you how many people have reached out to me with horror stories of forced injections and other types of medications that they were subjected to. So that's just like the pink drink or whatever, like that's just a very surface level memory that I don't know if we were allowed to retain, but that was probably one of the more mundane aspects of the program. And so it wasn't as heavily shadowed in our memories. But there are some people who remember a lot more detail about their time in GATE program, and it involved some crazy stuff.
Yeah, dude, it feels like, and I know it's not every day. I know there's a lot of research and time and energy that goes into like you making these videos to update people and not get banned, but like been a lot of updates. And I'm really curious about this particular doctor.
Oh, so I literally was just messaging another guy before we came on here because now I have a second name. I have a second person that is a public figurehead who was directly involved in experimenting on children in the GATE program. And this story, I mean, this is like, I cannot emphasize this enough. These are anecdotal experiences. I have no real concrete way of verifying any of these things apart from matching the stories. Right. So like the best tool that I have right now is taking experiences from all these different people and seeing how they overlap so consistently. And that is like my best way of verifying things. And I'm not saying I buy 100% into everything. I hear everyone out. And I try and put information out there so that everyone else can kind of digest it and hopefully add to the picture of this. And maybe eventually we'll get some real tools to be able to dig into this stuff and have real disclosure. But I had a guy reach out to me who said that he remembered someone who was assessing him through the GATE program, and he was like this doctor figure to him. And one of the things that he was essentially assessing this kid on was, and he was in kindergarten at this time, so like 5 years old, and he was being assessed on his ability to remote view. And this was happening in the 80s. And one of the things that he was able to successfully remote view this little kid under the direction of this guy was the Challenger explosion, the space shuttle explosion. He was able to pinpoint almost down to the exact date when that event would take place. And I'm just going to, hopefully this doesn't, this isn't a nail in the coffin and we don't get censored for this, but the man who was overseeing that project was Joe McGonigal, who is, I don't know if you've heard him before. He was a very prominent Army psychic. He was one of the lead people in Project Stargate with the CIA. He was also involved with Stanford Research Institute, which is a name that you will see over and over and over again if you are researching any of these things. So that's a very new, recent update of someone who has been sharing their story with me. This Joe McGonigal person, I think I'm saying his name right. And you can look up, interviews with him talking about his time working on Project Stargate and being used as a remote viewer for basically like espionage purposes. And it seems like all of these prominent people in this disclosure world, all these people who are disclosing psionics being used by the government and UFO disclosure, all of those people are not good people. Like they were directly involved. Like where do you think they got their information from? What do you think that they were researching? Who out of our population is the most susceptible to psychic phenomenon, right? Like in all media, in all books and movies, it's always the kids. It's always the kids who, like, before they hit puberty or whatever, they're opened up to the spirit world or they have all these abilities. So what do you think these people were studying? It was the children. Like, I don't know how to be more crystal clear about this. So all these guys who are now coming forward and disclosing things, they're not giving you the full story because they can't. It will ruin them and it will completely taint everyone's opinion of what's going on. So they're giving you this very manufactured, censored version of the truth to appease people, because people are hungry for this information. They want to know what's going on, but they can't just come out there and tell you, oh yeah, we've been experimenting on all of school-age children for the last 70 years. Sorry, like it's not going to fly. So
yeah,
it's rough.
There's this combination going on right now of, we laid this out in the last episode, but I'm going to quickly touch on it again. But when it comes to this idea of us doing this as a government, it actually makes sense from an incentive level, which is what drives everything that we do is incentives. It's ultimately what's gotten us into a very sort of delirious sort of nasty place where a lot of our energy has been harvested as bad incentives. But from an incentive level, we would have had to have done this as a sort of weapon, as a way of strategic deterrence, of competing at the global level. At least we would have 100% convinced ourselves that that was a noble incentive behind this, right? And so if any other countries of our adversaries were doing this themselves, we would have had to have done this. We would have at least felt like that, right? And there's a lot of reasons, and like you just laid out with children, there's this pattern through human history of this mystical aspect of children being noticed. And also, if it's expressed in a certain way in a lot of the indigenous cultures, these children are brought into more of the shamanic society, and their quote unquote powers are directed in a certain way. And a lot of times, and hopefully it's directed in a positive way within these sort of indigenous shamanic cultures and things like that. But even within those, there's some, I forget the name for them, but there's some like witchcraft and some crazy shit and
Oh
warfare,
yeah.
spiritual warfare that goes on. But and so there's this simultaneous combination of that, of like a lot of evidence pointing to, yeah, maybe they were doing this at least to some degree. Now, we don't know fully to what degree, like you've alluded to. I think it was this sort of spectrum that we're not fully aware of yet. And all we can do is compile sort of anecdotal data and have people give their testimonies and whatever it is, But it does seem like this is a pretty large phenomenon that was taking place. And so there's all this evidence pointing towards that this did happen on children, like you said, and simultaneously, there's a big incentive to not fully release this to the public because human beings are very fucking sensitive about their children, and you
Right.
doing some weird shit to their children that they didn't fucking know about. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's some
Right.
shit
Like
that human beings
the
are willing to die
JFK
about.
files have been locked
Yeah.
down for decades. That doesn't personally affect anyone. And they won't be willing to talk about that openly yet, even though most of the conspirators are probably long gone. And that is still under lock and key because it would be detrimental to sort of like the sovereignty of the US government. And if that is under lock and key, imagine how impossible it would be to disclose information involving a widespread experiment on all school-age children in the country and across the world for literally 70 years, because it's still happening today. It's still like, I need to make that very clear. This is still taking place today. We would be very naive to think that somehow fizzled out. It's still going on. There's much more sophisticated methods now, but it's still going on. Like, clearly it was viable. They wouldn't pour billions of dollars and decades of time and energy and research into something that wasn't working. They wouldn't. Another point here, everyone likes to talk about how evil Germany was about 100 years ago, right? Why did we recruit all those guys? Why did we have this massive program to bring all of those scientists and researchers who were conducting those evil experiments over here? Because it was getting somewhere. It was valid research. I'm not condoning it, but I'm saying, like, put the pieces of this puzzle together and you start to get a clear picture of what was going on. And this whole, competition with the Soviets, like, why would it be such a competition if it wasn't working?
And are also, with everything you're describing, there's this simultaneous sort of almost that still exists to this day, exponential increasement in the technological advancement and sophistication and things like that. This really rapid kind of thing that took place shortly after all this sort of like, world wars ended and this sort of Cold War started to kick off. There was this like rise into technological sophistication, that's really rapidly took place over the past, 80 to 100 years.
Right. And I suspect that an aspect of that, this is actually one of the claims that I made, not a claim, but just like an alternate theory about what could have been going on with this whole GATE program. I suspect that some of the research that was done on these children was directly used to develop these advanced AI systems. Like, if they were studying raw consciousness and people's ability to intuitively learn things, they were building models of how a computer would learn. And so I think that a huge part of this rapid growth and advancement we have seen is a result of these gifted and talented programs. And I think that they are now using that weapon to further their research. Like, one of the most mind-blowing points for people is they will stumble across one of my videos on TikTok or YouTube, and it will perfectly describe their entire childhood, their entire adult life, what they went through that they haven't thought about in 20, 30 years. And then their immediate follow-up question is, how the hell did the TikTok algorithm know that about me? It wasn't something that I was consciously aware of for decades.
Yeah.
So how did the algorithm how did it know to play this video for me? And I think that is sort of indirect evidence that these algorithms are partly being developed as a different type of research program to be able to identify people. If they can know you that intimately, to know that you were a psychically gifted child 30, 40 years ago, then of course they could pinpoint that in children now. And I feel like that is a huge part of it. Even things like, this is going off on like a crazy tinfoil hat rant, but I feel like video games is another huge part of it, like where they can analyze all of this data of reaction times and intuition in children, literally in military simulated um instances. Like that data is valuable. And so,
Yeah.
of course, that would be used as sort of a funnel program to identify these really gifted people in certain areas, whether it's tactical or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, a recruiter shows up at their door when they're 18. You know,
they already do this, like the current sort of like war that's going on, the Russo-Ukraine war, you know, a lot of drone warfare is going on. A lot of their best drone operators come from people who are heavy gamers and have this, and a lot of their drone actual like control units that will custom, they've started at mass making them with like to parallel like game controllers, like Xbox controllers and stuff, because people grew up on them. Their soldiers grew up with this hand-eye coordination with that type of controller. And so, yeah, there's this funneling into the drone operator programs and things like that. And people get really good at it too. A lot of these guys are really innately come in and they're very good at it already. And it's because they've been practicing almost their entire life. And, you know, one interesting thing that came to my mind here when you were, you know, speaking on all of this here, and you brought up, you know, Nazi Germany and the sort of like bringing in some of those people to our society afterwards, and that ran these really elaborate programs and things like that. But one of the things I'll never forget, on one of the Rogan podcasts, it was one of the Alex Jones ones. He was on one of his fucking spiels, but he blurts out that like Hitler and Nazi scientists were utilizing DMT to communicate with extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings to further advance their certain technologies and sciences and things like that. When I heard that, of course, then he just muddied over it and went through a bunch of other stuff too. But dude, I stuck on that point. I was like, is that true? And like, I don't know if I don't think I was ever able to fully confirm the DMT aspect of it like that. But there is a lot of evidence, and like it's proven that a lot of these Nazi scientists and Hitler himself were using drugs and experimenting with a wide array of drugs. Some of them consisting of, you know, LSD and LSD analogs and things like that. And so like, it would not surprise me if so that's one expression of it, right? Was this sort of like, let's use psychedelics and see if we can kind of like interact with this spiritual realm as well too. But if that's one expression of them trying to do that to further advance their own technological, societal warfare, whatever it was. And once again, like I described earlier, if this is going on right now with our adversaries, we have to compete. You know what I'm saying? So we'd be doing it right now. Same thing in the World War, in the World War II, especially with that threat and everything like that. We would have looked at that and what Hitler was doing in Nazi Germany with that spiritual warfare and been like, we have to fucking go to spiritual warfare as well too.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I think that the governments of the world had the exact same reaction to these things as Terrence McKenna did, but they took it literally. Where like I'm going to butcher the quote because I don't remember it, but basically Terrence said, like, if we could just take one object back from the DMT world and bring it into our reality, it would change the world forever. Yeah. And the governments had that experience and were like, yeah, we're going to fucking do that. Like, let's do that. And I feel like that is a huge part of this whole push that we've been experiencing for a long, long time, is these attempts to do that where like we can all kind of recognize that there are dimensions outside of our reality. There are entities that are highly intelligent that exist outside of our perception, and you can communicate with them and you can gain insane vast knowledge from them. And so the next logical step would be to figure out how you can bring that back. And I think that is that is a huge motivation for a lot of these programs, is trying to bring back those psychedelic or psychic abilities and have real world use applications.
Yeah. And I want to get your opinion. I 100% agree with you. I want to get your opinion on this aspect of it as well too. Because I've thought a lot about this with just psychedelics alone. and sort of like spirituality, but now I'm trying to like loop this into the whole like date thing and all of this that we're talking about. But like this idea of the false light or chasing the false light, right? Because a lot of people talk about, and I somewhat agree with this, right? That there's this kind of innate spirit to a lot of these different plants and medicines, and like you can interface with these beings that feel self-autonomous and feel like they have love and light and direction for you. But I've also interacted with some dark things as well too. You know what I'm saying? And there's instances throughout history of people interacting heavily with the cosmos, this other place, the psychedelics, whatever it is, and doing some gnarly things here with it. Like the Mayans are a perfect example of this. You know, like people talk about the mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, as if like it loves you and it's got an agenda and it's healing the world. And like I agree with that most of the fucking time. But we can look at the Mayans itself and be like, ooh, but they were ingesting mushrooms and ripping a dude's heart out. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
While that person was alive. You know what I'm saying? This
Right.
really, really crazy level of lack of empathy and the pursuit of sort of appeasing some sort of like being or deity that maybe was a false light. And when and like there's a lot to that, and so that's what. But like, yeah, I wonder to what degree, right? Like, say the Nazi Germany using DMT to interact with these beings, is there the potentiality, do you think, with some of these things to really truly use it for bad and interact with dark energies that are going to like dissuade you or whatever it is? I know it's a big rabbit hole right there, but
Yeah, I mean my views on this are very complex and
yeah.
confusing to most people. Um, but these are, to me, inescapable truths. I think that one of the core aspects of our reality is duality, like good and evil, male, masculine, feminine, all these different like binary concepts of seemingly opposing forces in certain perspectives. And I think that those truths ring out to all layers of reality, including these like higher dimensional beings or whatever. Like you said it yourself, like we have both interacted with things that we would consider good and things that we would consider evil. And so I think there is a huge potential to do either of those, to go on either path using these same tools. But I also think that at the deeper layer, like another inescapable truth is that we are all one. Like we are
Mm-hmm.
both good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
We have masculine and feminine energy, and these things are kind of like always in balance, kind of fighting for position. um and that kind of, even if you want to conceptualize these things as demons and angels and God and the devil and things like that, one of the things that I can't really grasp any other way at this point is that they're the same thing. Like at a certain
Mm-hmm.
level, the deepest possible rabbit hole you can go down is the fact that, like, if there is truly an omnipotent, all powerful energy source that you want to call God, then that's where the devil also exists. Like they're the same person, the same energy at a certain level of understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of, you get this freedom to navigate which side you want to interact with and which experience you want to have.
Mm-hmm.
um and I'm not like condoning evil or anything, but I just think that is a matter of fact in our simulation or whatever that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And I think that with that being said, I think that a lot of people can operate in this place of exploring and interacting with these different levels and dimensions in different places without having that sort of like that home beacon, that like that grounded, that centeredness to it, like you just described. Of well, at the core of it, it is all one. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think that so yeah, I agree with you that that's really important to keep in mind. But I can see a reality where someone like a Nazi scientist was doing intravenous DMT and interacting with a being that was helping him, do whatever. And he really did not keep that in particular aspect into consideration, that we're all one. He just thought maybe he was climbing the ladder, or really, you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? We see
Right.
this within the psychedelic sphere as well too, like we were just describing earlier, this sort of like ego inflation that can happen as well
Right.
too sometimes. And so with all this, like, and we don't have I don't want to get us too far off of track in the gate program and everything like that, but we're going so deep so quickly, and I love it. But I really want to pick your brain about this, because I don't think you and I have talked about this. um but this whole duality aspect, and this aspect of sometimes people taking psychedelics and interacting with weird things, expressing it in not always a love, peace, and light way.
Right.
Luigi Magnoni, this, I think that's how you say it. That gentleman, the one who
Yes.
got the CEO,
Yes.
who executed the CEO, right? And there's really interesting things that came out after the fact. People were really digging into him and his personal life and stuff like that, and it looked like there was a lot of evidence. And maybe this was planted. There's a lot of theories, but there's evidence that he was heavily researching and possibly using a lot of psychedelic drugs in the months leading up into that particular scenario. And so one of the things, my friend Josh is the one who told me about this whenever it was all unfolding and new. He was like, he sent me some articles and he's like, hey, check this out, dude. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh shit. And he
He was
said,
going on ayahuasca retreats and stuff.
yeah, he sent me a message back and he said, do you think the mushroom told him to do it? And I was like, oh shit. Because I'm sitting here thinking about it. And I was like, there's so many aspects of that, right? But I'm like, I can see possibly how, if that man was already pointed in that direction and truly was convinced that he was doing it for, maybe say the collective, the betterment of others, or something like that, right? That maybe further reinforced it, or maybe that wasn't even there in the first place. Maybe the mushroom, maybe there was just a little bit of that, and maybe the mushroom or ayahuasca or whatever it was fully like, hey, bro, you see this at the big scale, the collective level. And I'm not saying, once again, I'm not trying to get censored. I know there's a lot of aspects of it. This is not my full opinion, right? But there's an argument to be made that what he has done has already had somewhat of a positive effect on some people's lives. You know what I'm saying? Of course,
Right.
there's the reverse argument to be made. I'm not saying I understand all aspects of it yet. You know what I mean? But there is that argument to be made. So, like, what do you think, man, about the whole duality and like him possibly interacting with this space himself as well too?
So I would say, first and foremost, I haven't seen enough evidence yet to convince me that he's the man, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily know that he's the true culprit for what went down. But putting that aside, if he is the guy, I'm going to kind of bring this all back. I am very suspicious of whether or not he himself was a GATE student. Um, I know that he was kind of, if you look into his history, he was praised for high intelligence, and
Yeah.
he was in advanced classes and things like that. And I did a little bit of digging. It was pretty hard to really come up with anything at all conclusive. But I suspect that he would have been involved in some sort of program like that. And I think that that may have been a larger factor in, let's say, if he did have these psychedelic experiences that pushed him over the edge to commit this act. I think that a bigger factor in his evil interpretation of those experiences would have been the indoctrination and experimentation that went on him, where he went through as a child in this program. And this is all wild conspiracy theory, all, unfounded, just spitballing here. But
Mm-hmm.
if I had to guess, I think that, like, people, every time I make a video on the GATE program, people are always like, so I'm a sleeper cell, I'm a sleeper agent. And I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, yeah, actually, like, that's kind of like what this all was about, is to, like, a huge factor in, uh, sort of the brainwashing process and compartmentalization of our memories through this, was they would fracture our consciousness. They have very extreme methods to create dissociative identity disorder within people, and that is how they are able to compartmentalize these different aspects and memories. So it wouldn't surprise me if someone like him was a victim of that, and that he had these sort of latent ideas and indoctrination within him that got triggered by some sort of experience that he was led on later in life. And he might not even have conscious memory of what went down. Like he might think that he was innocent and have no, and that's why it's kind of hard to pin this on him, because in a certain light he is multiple people. And that is kind of like, that would be the golden standard for a sleeper agent, is to have someone like that you could just activate, do a deed, kind of coerce the entire consciousness of the country, and truly influence people. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's just, if I had to guess, if I had to give it my wildest conspiracy theory, I think that that's what it would be. It's not necessarily that the psychedelic experiences, I mean, maybe it could have been like he just had a really bad ayahuasca ceremony and it's like, I'm gonna go assassinate somebody. But it wouldn't surprise me if there was already some road work laid with him as a child, and that like this was already laid out for him before he had that experience.
Yeah, that's a really interesting theory. He's a sleeper cell, and it's making me reflect on my own experience with, and I don't know if it was caused by the gifted and talented per se. I don't think it was necessarily just that, but I think from a very young age, and still to this day, I developed this pretty heavy distrust for like the education system and the system in general and the government and police and things. I just, from a really young age, basically since I remember being conscious, I just was like, authority can fuck off. You know what I mean? And like,
Right.
so I don't know if that's another commonality maybe that's expressed within the gifted and talented kids at all, because like you think, yeah, man, there's a certain like, because while there probably was a lot of like resources and highly intelligent people that went into the sort of coordination of what these programs looked like and what we were doing to kids and how do we test on them, yet keeping it under wraps and all the things, right? They're gonna have flaws in the cracks too. Like they're gonna within the process of all that, they're gonna piss some people off. You know what I'm saying? They're gonna like, maybe they did develop some sleeper cells as well too. Because like you described this one individual who reached out to you and said that they had a deep relationship with. I might butcher this a little bit, but this Joe McGonigal, Joe McGonigal.
Yeah, Joe McMonagle, I think.
McMonagle, okay, the army psychic guy, and it was the child who had expressed some of these psychic abilities with being able to remote view the destroyer exploding, right? And so, kind of like I was describing earlier, with this sort of like parallel that we've seen in shamanic indigenous cultures, that the ones who really heavily express this kind of get focused on and brought in, and like the elders will kind of like usher them into the next generation. This is a particular instance in where you can see like there was this base level of like catching of things, right? This safety net that we talked about. But then when they really found somebody, it seemed like there's these instances, these hot spots that where other people have reached out to you and more things are coming to the surface, where some people got really far along the path. And it sounds like this individual got so fucking far along the path that they expressed remote viewing psychic abilities, and then a fucking army indoctrinated remote viewer person came in to further bring them into the governmental sort of psychic ability program.
Right.
And once again, it's hard to verify all these things and stuff, man. But like, I mean, damn, you know?
Yeah, it definitely serves as a wide net. And also another point that I want to make before we go down this road is it wasn't just gifted and talented. That was the thing that sort of started to uncover all of this research, and that was my personal experience, was being selected for a program like that. But it's not limited to that program. There's all these layers of it where it was a very wide net, and some of these kids that were sort of, they suspected that they had these psychic abilities, they were put in special needs classes. and told that they were unintelligent, that they couldn't read, that they were dumb. Some people were put into speech therapy classes and told that they had a speech impediment when they didn't. And I
Whoa.
think that there was a lot of
There was an
psychological manipulation on this.
there was an instance of that within my own high school of this one girl who was in special education classes who from elementary school through middle school, people were kind of like, "Ooh, does she need to be in there? Does she not?" Um, and then in high school, I think it got to this boiling point of people were like, "Ah, fucking no! Like, what are we doing to her? What have we
Right.
been doing to her?" And like, she eventually, I think, kind of like got out of them, and like, but it was like kind of like this mind fuck to me of like, like I considered myself as a child not like a genius, but I thought I had like above average intelligence, and I was grateful for like I didn't think the education system was perfect in any ways. In fact, I thought it was heavily flawed, but like there at least was some programs and things and teachers and stuff that really heavily encouraged the good that they saw in me and tried to nurture that in the best way that they could. But like I was thinking to myself, like, damn, even with my base level of whatever I got handed to me genetically and all the things, like what would have happened to me if I had been put through and told I was special needs and put into special needs classes and like and taught at that level, so yeah, there was an instance of this within my own high school, and I don't mean to cut you off from what you were talking about, but yeah,
Yeah.
this happened where I'm at that too.
I think that was on purpose. I think that a lot of these maybe innate psychic abilities have very little to do with intelligence, right? Like, I don't think that I'm some super genius. I think I'm probably middle of the road with most of the people who went through these programs, either gifted and talented or special needs. And the purpose of laying it out like that was a psychological experiment to see who would be more malleable, who would be more willing to come work for us and be a good soldier. Is it a kid that we praised and inflated their ego and told them they were special and gifted and highly intelligent? Or would it be that same kid who, with the same psychic abilities, and we tell them that they're dumb, that they don't know how to read? We have to keep them away from the other kids in the class, and just berate them and step on them, and
Yeah.
which outcome would be better. And I think that there's a lot of different angles that they were taking to figure out how they can take a child who would be psychically gifted, or essentially, like, I like to think of it in the terms that you mentioned before of like shamanism. Like, if we were in some indigenous culture, this child would have been selected by the local shaman to kind of be brought up and taught the ways. And the government agencies seem to kind of hijack that whole ceremony and then figure out how to turn them into super soldiers, essentially. And they're just trying to figure out all the different angles that they could take to make the best version of that. And I think
Yeah.
that that's why we see the same experiences in gifted and talented, as well as special needs classes or speech therapy, or all these different ways that they experimented on us. Because it was a very, very large, long, complex experiment on children.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would make perfect sense that they did sort of like in marketing, they call that A/B testing. It's like when you set up the parameters to be very similar, but you have this like distinct difference in it, and you let it play out over a period of time to see which one performs better. And so, yeah, it makes sense that they did this.
Yeah, 100%. What were we talking
So,
about before that? Before I went on the tangent about special needs classes? I can't remember. There was some point that I was leading to before I wanted to make that clarification, but now I can't remember.
dude, we've gotten so deep into it so quickly. So,
Well, we can talk about the other figure that I have many people coming out and naming.
yeah.
And
Do you care if I take a break for just like 2 minutes to go pee real quick,
oh
bro?
no, dude, I have to go pee as well, so that's perfect.
Awesome. Cool. All right. We'll be right back, guys. What's up, homie?
You ready?
Yeah, dude. So Dr. Greer. Are we allowed to say his name?
I don't know, man. I have posted things on YouTube that were fine. TikTok,
Okay.
you cannot mention this man's name on TikTok.
You know what? All of this is allegedly Dr. Greer, right?
Right.
Fuck it. Whatever. We're gonna run with it.
Yeah. And when I say like controversial, I mean my videos were almost instantly deleted off of TikTok. Like within a couple of minutes of posting, They were fully deleted, and I was given content violations and strikes against my account.
What was the reasons that they gave you with
They don't
the?
give you a reason on TikTok. They just say you violated something, sorry. And then I would appeal it. It would get approved and then instantly deleted again with another violation strike. Like, I mean, when I say hot topic, this is the most controversial thing that I have ever spoken about on a
Even
platform.
more so than lucid dreaming or psychedelic drugs or anything.
I never have seen anything to this extent before. That's where it was
so weird.
Immediately locked down. Actually,
So
I lie. The only other time that I experienced that was when I named someone else who was a part of misinformation and the government, and it's a very large platform and a very large podcast that is actually hosting these same men that were involved in the Gifted and Talented program. And
can you say it, or are you going to have to tell me afterwards?
I think I can, because I've posted this content to YouTube and I haven't. It hasn't gotten any traction. Sean Ryan, the Sean Ryan Show is Monarch programming. It's Monarch programming.
I've had that fucking feeling for so long. This is so crazy, because I was showing my friend, it's like a year ago, maybe more than a year ago. I was showing my friend Josh, who I really respect his opinion and insight on a lot of different things. And I purposely interfaced with him for that reason, like with a lot of these different topics. But I showed him a certain Sean Ryan clip. And he didn't fucking trust it. He really was, and it makes sense now, because I've had this weird fucking feeling about that man myself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, and that's like, you know who he's interviewed? He's interviewed Stephen Greer. He's interviewed Joe McMoneagle. He's interviewed all of these guys who were involved in the same shit. And
do you think he knows?
I know that he knows. Okay, this is all alleged. This is all speculation. I'm just a crazy guy with a tinfoil hat. None of this is real. I'm just making it up. However, I know of a source. He goes by Gray Area Monarch. He goes by Gray. He's on X, and he has a lot of different podcast interviews and stuff. And he actually grew up in the same cult as me. He was in Jehovah's Witnesses when he was young, and he actually was exposed to a much deeper, darker layer of that, where he got put through essentially Monarch programming, which is like a new iteration of MK Ultra for people who don't know. And one of the things that he claims he went through as a child.
Sean Ryan was in the CIA himself, dude. That's so crazy.
Right? Yeah, he was a SEAL and a CIA operator. Yeah, and all these people who have the title of ex-CIA is the most laughable title in the world. That it's a cult. There is no X. You don't get out.
Yeah,
you get unalived.
So, like the Mike Baker guy who keeps coming on Rogan. Right. He's been on Rogan for like a decade. Right. It's like,
dude, every time Mike Baker goes on Rogan, my favorite pastime is to read through the comments. And one of the last time he was on, one of the top comments was Mike Baker came to replace the batteries in all of the microphones he placed in JRE. And I was like, yeah, probably has a lot of equipment set up.
Shout out to a YouTube channel right now called Podcast Cringe. If you haven't heard of them, Jake, I really recommend.
Dude, I literally was watching them in the shower this morning,
bro, because that gentleman is doing a really good job right now of exposing this weird sort of network of individual news networks that are just so unbiased and so not bought out. And it's like, oh yeah, motherfuckers, like, and not it's okay. A lot of his content is centered around sort of like the common sort of humanly pitfalls that a lot of these big quote unquote thought leaders fall into. But there's also some weird kind of like interconnectivity, shady shit going on, it seems like, as well too. That's coming more and more to the surface. And so you saying this about the Sean Ryan is like, oh fucking what? Yeah. Why did I think about this? I had a weird feeling about him, and he was in the fucking ex-CIA, like you said.
Right. Yeah. And he's been on Rogan before. Like, I don't know if Rogan is actually privy to this stuff or if he is just a useful idiot.
I think watching a lot of podcast cringe and being a part of the early days of Joe Rogan and seeing something like tapping back into it every now and then with him, I get this feeling with him that it's both of what you just described. I think he's simultaneously fallen into this place where he can kind of just coast with the podcast stuff and still make a amount of money and have some influence in that and prop up his friends while not having to do a whole lot of like actual like work. And you can kind of tell sometimes there's certain guests that come on where it's like, bro, like you maybe could have prepared better. But I think ultimately with Joe, like it's like he truly does have a whole lot of shit, like a whole lot of different interests. And you can like, you've seen this expressed with him. He's expressed this before of like, I don't know how much of like he wants to be a sort of like politician, change the world type of guy. And so I feel like as his podcast exploded and he kind of like his name exploded and his influence exploded, there's probably somewhat of this covert kind of not necessarily hijacking, but steering of his ship that is still somewhat in place that he wasn't immediately privy to, but over time I think has become somewhat privy to and has just probably allowed. And I say all that because like I think if he really were to bring this fully to the conscious level and it were to be like really important to him, like there would be a lot more different conversations being had right now on his platform. And like for instance, okay, so like with all this being said, dude, everything we just said, I think we make it a mission, and like I'll fucking put our PR team to work on this or whatever the fuck. We get you on Sean Ryan, dude, and have him bring in Greer and whoever the fuck. I'll fucking come on with you, bro. I'll back you up. I'll do my research. We'll go on Sean Ryan together.
One of the things I wanted to do when I had all of this evidence being presented to me about Greer was I wanted to get him on a podcast and make it appear like it was just the typical UFO discussion and then trap him halfway through. Like, actually, like I have 20 people coming forward saying that you experimented with them as children. You want to comment on that? And I was like, because I've, done that before where I've kind of weaseled my way into getting guests, like, but back when I had a podcast that I had no business getting, but I knew the techniques to get people that I wanted to talk to. And I was like, I could probably get Greer. Like I know people that have his phone number and I could weasel my way in. And my fiance was like, "You're gonna get yourself killed. Like, I don't want that. I don't approve of that." And I was like, "All right." Like, I always listen to her whenever I am going too far because I have no sense of self-preservation, and I'm just like, I'm gonna attack these guys. Like, I'm gonna just put everything out on the line and tear them down because that's just who I am. But I have a different sense of obligation having a family now, so I didn't execute that plan. But no, I mean, I still dream about doing that. I still dream of confronting these people because someone has to. And I feel like there are very few people who are privy to this full scope of information. Like Rogan, like the amount of industry plants that he consistently has on his platform is not coincidental. Brother, so either someone is steering him or he's fully on board with it.
And like there's a lot of this that we're pulling from that's like this accumulation of anecdotal data and people speaking up, but a lot of it's not even that either. Like a lot of this is evidence like put in place of, and so like it just really makes me question like, yeah, kind of like you've said, I mean, ultimately, if it maybe there's something we're missing or something, dude, or maybe there's some sort of explanation, like, but like, why couldn't there be you sitting down on Rogan with Greer or you sitting down on Sean Ryan with Greer? Because like this feels like something that people are really, really interested in. It seems like there's a lot more coming to the surface as we bring it to the collective level of consciousness,
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I would, that was one of the goals, obviously, of starting out and doing all of this and researching these topics was to find the truth and to give people real satisfying answers about what happened to them without their permission or knowledge. I do think that there are certain bees nests that if you kick them, everything falls apart as a society. And I also recognize that like there's I have a healthy amount of caution as to how much I can actually disclose with people and be upfront and honest about without having a bunch of Luigi Mangiones running around. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not advocating for that either.
It's interesting you express this because one of my best friends, somebody who I speak to quite often, I would consider him kind of like a visionary type. It's not that I think he has the full vision of it all, but I really appreciate and think he has an interesting vision. He gets these little blurps into the other realm, you know. Um, but one thing he's described to me a lot is that, you know, he feels like there's this sort of shift coming, and he feels like we as a collective aren't ready for the full truth of it yet, as in the sort of response, what the response would be if the common person understood what's actually been playing out and how our energies have really been kind of been harvested and what has been done to our children. And if the common person truly got all this influx of information at once and fully understood it, um, he sees that as a sort of inflection point, as this sort of white flash almost. He's described that to me for quite some time now. It's been like a year or two. This man has been telling me this, and so like, it's interesting to hear you describe the sentiment as well too. Of like,
I think it's a singularity, just like people
yeah,
talk about artificial superintelligence being a singularity. This point in the future that it's physically impossible for us to conceptualize what that looks like. I think that this is another singularity. Like if every single person on the planet, and I'm not saying like I'm some special person or anything, but like if everyone was on the same page as us and they had this download of information of all the things that I've been researching and looking into and the patterns that I've been seeing, if everyone got that overnight, I literally cannot conceptualize what that would look like the next day.
yeah.
Good or bad. No, I just don't know what would happen. And that scares me. Anything
And
unknown scares me.
I think that's part of the reason. Maybe you know you're saying this out loud. I think that might be part of the reason why that's how it's being expressed slowly, is through people like you, because there is this dissemination of it and it does spread. It's like a mycelial network. It's not this overnight download to everybody, but if you fucking through the alien abductions, through the psychedelic experiences, through the sleep deprivation, through the sound tapes, the whatever it is, the way that they're able to come in and give us these Easter eggs, if you implant that through a bunch of individuals throughout the society who you know are going to disseminate it themselves, it kind of is like boiling the frog a bit. You know what I'm saying? It's slowly bringing it to the surface to heat. You know, one thing I want to ask you about with all of this, and I don't know if this is something you've considered a whole lot too much yourself or looked too much into, but there's a lot of talk right now, ever since the new, administration came into this country. There's been a lot of news, like almost every day. There's a lot of shit going on, but for a lot of different reasons. But one of the big things that's happening right now is all of the Doge stuff and the uncovering of what our money as Americans has been spent on. I know it's a very hot topic issue right there.
Right.
But with this being said, this sort of discovery of all of these programs and ways that our taxpayer money has been distributed and used and whatever. Do you think like this gate program, or has it been any of this been uncovered in any of the Doge stuff and findings with like, because you think like something like, and I know it's more of a, maybe it's CIA, maybe there's certain parameters and layers set around it so that it's hard for them to uncover exactly where the money went to and why and things. And there's been a lot of that, but like, if this is a widespread net, like you were describing earlier, really large with big government officials involved, all these like, I mean, dude, like I was in the program, you were in the program, like there's so many people I've talked to who are in the program themselves. Like it's a very big thing. There's a lot of money spent on this, I assume. So yeah, I wonder, do you think that any of this will come out with any of the Doge stuff?
I think that maybe a small bit of information, or honestly, as kind of like defeating as this sounds, I don't think so, because the CIA learned from the MK Ultra disclosure and the hearings. They learned from that, and what they did was they destroyed all evidence and then outsourced everything to privatized industry. And that's what the whole military industrial complex represents, is this shell game where there's plausible deniability. It's not officially under any sort of government direction. It's all these backdoor conversations and shuffling of money under different corporations and things like that. So I don't think that Doge would have the ability to actually audit anything going on with this program, because there's no direct on paper ties anymore to the
Yeah.
government. I think that it's all been shuffled around and hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, I don't think that there exists this evidence trail that people want and need on purpose. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist. Maybe there's some filing cabinet with hard copies somewhere in the world, but the likelihood that that won't get completely burned to a crisp before any regular person can get their hands on it is next to nothing. And like
Yeah.
I think that these things are just going to be lost to history and become rumors and legends and, you know, mythical stories about our population, our civilization in the future. There's just no, I don't know, maybe I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see any sort of real satisfying disclosure on these sorts of topics, because there is nothing to disclose. There is no physical evidence trail or paper trail. It doesn't exist. They cover that. They're the, you know, most intelligent, most capable entities on the planet right now. They're not going to leave that behind. They
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah, this shell game that you described is very real, and it is how we've operated for a very long time, and it's where a lot of our resources have gone to. I think it's something like 12 to like 20 different African countries. We have special operators like deployed to, troops on the ground. Like most American citizens don't know that, and it's because it's all done through the shell game of, you know, multiple layers of, like, it's basically outsourced and privatized. And my own stepfather was involved in that as well too. After he got out of the military and retired, he went and worked for a private company as a basically soldier for hire for several
Yep.
years. And like, I was in high school when he did that, and that was a very weird concept to me of like, oh, you just got out, you're going back, but you're like, you make a lot more money now this way.
Right.
It was weird, dude. It was odd. But then you come to find out there's a humongous global market for that, in general. But it is how a lot of the United States works. But yeah, dude, I all this is so crazy to me. So, one thing that you alluded to within your videos that I thought was interesting, and we talked about this in the last episode, was one of the commonalities that some of these gay kids described was, especially at certain ages, the hearing of voices, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you released a video talking about talking back to these voices.
Yes.
And I thought that that was really interesting, and it invoked some memories within me of some of my experiences within the cosmos and the mysterious tremendum as well too, but also my own experiences of this as a kid and hearing the voices, and at time talking back to the voices, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, could you describe that phenomenon to me a little
Yeah,
bit?
so that whole video and that stance that I put out there for people was really things that I have learned in adulthood. Because my experience with hearing these voices, and first of all, like, if you can research, if anyone has experienced that as a child or is currently going through right now, there is some research out there that you can look into about, you know, hypnagogic sleep states and these different auditory and visual hallucinations that you can experience in this sort of like transition phase between wakefulness and sleep. But my problem with that is these are just labels. Like, it's just like saying, oh, it's just a dream. Okay, what the fuck is a dream? No one knows what that means. It's just a label that we slap on something so that we can feel better about ourselves. But
So therefore, what is the Twilight Zone too that you're describing? Like, what the fuck is that?
right. So people,
Yeah.
when I talk about hearing these voices, people will just write it off, be like, oh, that's just a hypnagogic sleep state. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm happy that you learned that word, but what does that mean? Like, why is that happening? And no one has the answer. Like, that is in the definition of it, essentially.
It's such a mystery to us, and there's a lot of money and research and stuff going into the whole sleep and dreaming and why we dream stuff right now. But even with all that, dude, we still don't fucking fully understand it or why we do it. And I think I personally believe there's some spiritual significance to it for sure. But you know,
Of course, yeah, I'm fully on board.
yeah,
I feel like the official narratives and definitions of things is another trap, sort of, to misdirect people. But
Yeah, and
if you seek for spiritual answers, you get some satisfaction out of it.
yeah, and I really don't want to get us off track, but and we'll loop back to this. I'm going to write down a note. But we're talking
Sure.
about dreams. It just reminded me, I had a dream a few nights ago that I'm going to tell you about.
Oh,
That's
yes.
like
Yes,
somewhat.
I'm
Yeah,
down for that.
yeah,
No, it's funny you mentioned that. Like we basically, even in our most advanced research on the topic, have no clue what sleep is. And one of my favorite quotes was from this guy who literally, I think he founded and ran the Stanford research aspect of sleeping. And I can't remember the exact quote as per usual for me, but it was something to the effect of like the number one question that he always got asked about his research in time running this department was, why do we sleep? And his answer was, because we get sleepy. And like that was the best that he could come up with. Like he basically has no clue why we do this thing for half of our lifespan.
yeah.
His best guess was we sleep because we get very tired. And that really sums up like where we are in terms of our understanding of these very complex aspects of our reality and our consciousness.
Yeah. I remember, I forget which book it was, but there was some spiritual text I was reading. I don't think it was a spiritual. I think it was like a book for dummies about quantum physics. It was
Nice.
it was like supposed to distill it down for the average bear to understand. But even then, it was a bit like, ooh, this is complex, you know. But
Right.
uh, oh shit, what were we just talking about?
We were talking about the mystery of sleep and the hearing the voices.
Yeah, and it describes sleep, and this made sense. But like, you know, there's this giant mystery around like why we do it, and like why we sleep in the first place, but then also why do we dream, you know, as well too. And one thing you can look at, one correlation you can look at, is that in sensory deprived states, say like a darkness retreat in a cave, or like a sensory deprivation tank or something like that, weird shit starts to happen with our brain, right? And same thing when we're sleeping, we're in this pretty radically sensory deprived. We're sensory deprived in this pretty radical way, you know what I'm saying? And so for whatever reason, all of a sudden our brain starts to create some sort of reality and wildly hallucinates. And I don't think it came to this exact conclusion of like why all this is happening. It was, maybe it did. It was a quantum book, and I'm an idiot and blanking on a lot of it. But it was like but you know, when you break it down to that level, it is kind of that simple. We're in an extremely sensory deprived state, and we're wildly hallucinating, and we don't know why we're doing it.
Right.
You know, and if one thing to consider about all this too, the dreaming thing, is that if we were to do this, experience any of these fucking symptoms of it while we were awake, we would be like deterred. We'd be like, whoa, bro. And we'd go to a doctor, and the doctor would be like, dude, something's wrong with you. If you were to like be like, hey, I'm visiting castles, like,
Right, exactly.
You know, people be like, something's wrong. But because we do it while we're quote unquote asleep, it's completely normalized, and people are just like, you had a dream, bro. Yeah, whatever.
Right.
But if you do it while you're fucking awake, you're the schizophrenic crazy guy.
Right.
You know?
And I am someone who experienced both. And I understand, like, the only conclusion that I could come to is this right now is a version of a dream. Like, there's just dreams within dreams. But yeah, so getting back to this topic of hearing these voices, that was a phenomenon that like both of us have experienced. It was particularly around falling asleep, where for me it presented itself as like these male voices, and a lot of times it was like a distant mumbling, almost like a crowd of them. The way I described it is it sounded like a group of scientists off in another room talking about me, or in like a stern way.
Yes, like almost like adults that were like, oh, they're having some conversation about you.
Yes.
I'll never, dude, it was always like in my childhood bedroom, I had slept on these, on this twin bed, and I'll never forget, it was always like, if I was laying down, it was always up and to my left. Like this certain area of my field, if you will, where the source of these mumblings would come from. And then a lot of times it would be like this mumbling amongst them, but then sometimes it would also be directed at me some like every now and then. It'd be like, Gabe, like,
Yes.
and shit,
Yeah.
like, dude, it was. And then I
Yeah.
remember very clearly this being, my mom still talks about it this day. Like, there was a moment when I was a kid, and I remember I would describe this to my parents about, like, I'm hearing voices, and like, they were concerned for a while when I was a kid that I was maybe developing like signs of like schizophrenia or something like that, because I was so heavily adamant about telling them that, like, hey, I'm hearing voices. Like, I would casually tell my mom, like, in the morning getting ready for school, like, yep, they were crazy last night, those
Yep.
voices, like the voices were gnarly, you know, like.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah,
dude, it was
and
a
that
big part of my
phenomenon of
childhood.
them calling out your name is another like sort of universal experience with this phenomenon.
Yeah.
And also another thing is uh, anger. That was another thing I heard, like the distant mumbling. I would hear them call my name specifically, and then also they would be yelling at me and screaming profanities. And like, you
Mhm.
know, when I was a little kid, like curse words were scary and taboo, so that haunted me, especially whenever they were like seemingly angry with me. And so that was just something that I kind of bottled up and never talked about for years, and eventually it went away.
Yeah, there's this interesting correlation that I'm finding in this conversation about the sort of voices right now. This is all subjective, and I want to know if you resonate with this at all too. But in a lot of my mystical, especially DMT experiences, this has happened in several different formats with several different types of beings, where I've visited these different dimensions and been surrounded by and visited these families or clusters or groups of beings who felt like, and at times even communicated to me, that they knew me and that they loved me, or that they were my family, or that they were my ancestors. And I've seen this, and within the DMT space alone, this is played out on several different occasions in several different ways with different groups of beings. And then so I had this dream I had the other night, dude. This was a few nights ago. I had a dream where I took some Amanita before I went to sleep, and so like Amanita can sometimes, often gives me pretty crazy dreams, and I think that's really what it was. But and it wasn't like I wasn't really communicating with them a whole lot, but it was these blue orb like, and I know you're going to appreciate this a lot, blue orb like angelic beings. Like they had wings and they were like blue, and there was just this sense they were all surrounding me and telling me that they loved me, and that like I was doing good. Like it was this, and this is played out, and like, so it's played out in my DMT experiences quite a bit. It's played out in a few different dreams now, I think, as well too. This sort of like reuniting with spirit families or something like that. And now you're describing these voices as like this group of beings that is existing somewhere in the cosmos or whatever it is, another dimension, that was like aware of you and knew you, was interacting with you. Maybe it wasn't all in a good intentions, but there's this fucking trend that I'm noticing with this and the exploring of the cosmos, of people running up, and I'm not the only one who's described this as well too. It's a very common thing for people to describe about the mysterious tremendum. Indigenous people really hone in on this aspect of it, of these are our ancestors, you know, these are our. But yeah, just kind of like, what do you think of all of that? And,
I mean, I think that with everything, we we're having this discussion as humans who experience everything through linear time. Like I just had I made a video about this last night, where it's impossible for us to take these experiences back with us and then not put it through that lens of being a human and experiencing time in a certain way. And so it makes sense to me that we express these things as our ancestors, or things that kind of fall in line with this concept of time, where in a deeper version of reality that might not be the case. Like time, I don't really think that it's a real thing. It's not like this constant law that exists throughout all dimensions and things like that. So I think that describing them as our ancestors is definitely, it's like a useful tool to help
Mhm.
people understand things. But I think that outside of this reality that we live in, there truly is this deep connectedness to the point of it
Mhm.
basically being all the same thing.
Yeah.
And so when we experience something like that and then try and understand it from our perspective, we kind of separate it again and try and
Right.
understand it in these concepts that we're familiar with.
I love that you just described that, because like when you're thinking about like, especially like say the come down of the rocket ride of the DMT experience, there is this like in the moment while you're there, there's this massive gnosis and like everything you're describing of the interconnectivity, you feel it, you're a part of it, you've always known it, right? And then when you come back in and there's a separation, you're back in your ego, there's this grappling for a way to describe what you just felt, right? Like it can't be
Right.
known, it can only be felt itself. And so there's this weird grappling with like, how do I put this into our human words and structure of things? And my last conversation I had with Trip Whip, he described this similar thing too, of like, he was like, I think it's because we just don't have the words, you know. He's like, we're grappling for so we're putting it in some sort of kind of like almost box in a way, and not necessarily that we mean to, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just in our attempt to bring it to this reality or articulate it within this reality. That's just the nature of kind of what happens sometimes.
Yeah, we just have
Yeah.
limited tools. We have a very small paintbrush to use, and that happened to me. Like I felt it's not something that I'm like above or immune to. Like I do the same exact thing. It's a pitfall that I'm always in as well. Like the first time I truly launched on DMT and I came back to my body, and like the only way that I could conceptualize it and describe it was I experienced reincarnation. Like I knew what it meant to be a part of everything and then get downloaded into a singular perspective in a body again in this physical 3D reality. And the only thing that I could that even came close to describing that experience was reincarnation. And I clung to that for a while afterwards. And it took me a long time to kind of counter that perspective and be like, that was just your ego interpreting this. Like that's not actually the full picture of what's going on. I don't even have words to describe the full picture, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not that's an maybe an aspect of it, a pretty useful way to describe these things, but
Right.
it doesn't do it justice.
And I think that's where people who have felt these things for themselves, they very easily see through and simultaneously appreciate the pitfalls of something like religion. Because it's like, we see that you were just trying to map this dimension. You know what I'm saying? Like you
Right.
were,
Yeah, you're doing a good
yeah,
job. You're trying your best.
you're trying, dude. But like you know, like it's really cute. But like you, yeah. And yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I love
But
that.
yeah, so that's how I conceptualize all these different entities and experiences that you have in these weird mystical states of mind. I do think that there are, with everything, there's a bunch of layers. There's a bunch of like I kind of view consciousness as this very complex tree with many different branches and twigs and leaves and a deep root
Mm-hmm.
system and all of that. And we kind of live in the outermost layer of this reality that is a tree. We're like, you know, like the leaves on the tree or something to that effect. And we can have these experiences where we get closer to the central trunk and experience that true unity. And we realize, oh shit, we're all just one tree. And then we can have maybe an experience that isn't as deep where we're not feeling that complete unity. But maybe we realize that we are a part of the branch that has all these different offshoots and leaves, and all those different entities that we encounter and experience feel like family or ancestors or a part of ourselves. And there is an aspect of that that is true and accurate. um, and that's like the best way of describing it. But then like the bigger picture is realizing that we are actually just we're all the tree. And
Mm-hmm.
even though we experience life as a leaf, and we might encounter a branch that we're all a part of that feels like something more connected than what we experience in the day to day. It's a very complex, hard to describe, like nuanced perspective on reality. But that's one way that I've found is a little bit easy to illustrate it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's we take different trips to different layers of depth, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them you shoot straight through to complete ego dissolution and are having the god reality, and you know that everything is one and time is an illusion. And then sometimes you don't go as far, and you can experience a different aspect of reality.
Yeah. And if you think about, if you think one thing that we've said a bunch of those podcasts, and I think almost anyone in the psychedelic or spiritual space will mostly agree with is this concept at the core of it that, um, like we are all one. Uh, and so if you think about that, if that's true, then the only truth there can actually really be is God, is all the accumulation of all the perspectives at once. And that like, um, and so like, you know, we do get moments, it feels like, at least it's very, sparingly at random times. It felt like I've had like these Godhead like moments where it's in the moment, it felt like I fully understood the truth. But once again, once I come back down the mountain, all I'm offered here is this sort of like, is my perspective, which is one sliver of the truth. It's not the full truth, and I can accumulate others' perspectives and things and do my best, but I'm never going to have the full truth of things. I guess that's God. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And that's like the opposite of the point of this. Like if we are all God choosing to have an individual experience, then enjoy the individual experience and stop trying to reassimilate into, the godlike entity or version of yourself. And that's like one of the biggest takeaways that I've had with valuing other people's perspectives, even ones that are completely opposite of me or discredit what I believe in. Like, if I truly believe that we are all some aspect of God, then my best chance of kind of understanding that as a human is to entertain all of these other perspectives because they're equally as valuable. They wouldn't exist if there wasn't a point to it, and some value in going off in that different direction. So yeah, I think that
And
that's the best way to do it.
valuing all these other perspectives and simultaneously like honoring your own incarnation. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, we have like the ego could be an issue, but also like we have a fucking ego. Isn't that kind of cool? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. I think that it's cool. There was a long period of time where I was kind of like, this sucks. Like once you have that God-like experience and you're connected to everything all at once, and then you get back in here and you're like, this is so annoying. Like, why would I choose to do this? But then after a while, you sort of realize like there's beauty in this. There's something fun about playing this game and just experiencing things through this tiny little straw perspective that you get. And every once in a while you can meet another person that you connect with and you can kind of compare notes about what you're seeing through your straw. And that's just the fun of it. It's kind of like playing blind and having experiences and knowing what it's like to have an individual perspective and all that stuff.
And I don't know this to be true, but just as another example of this sort of like human funneling of these mystical insights into our own egoic representations of them, I have this belief that I stand behind that I chose to be here from like a higher perspective soul level. And whether or not that's true, I really don't care. I'm going to like echo that to others and myself and stand by that, because regardless of whether it's true, it's going to benefit me to fully believe in that. But at the same time, I truly do believe that. You know what I'm saying? I truly do think like I kind of chose to be here. And so like, yeah, it is. I too have been caught in the trap sometimes of wanting to be in the ether and be the Godhead. And I think it's definitely very beneficial to dip into that. But this, I feel like where I'm feeling like closest to God, like more and more close to God nowadays, is being like happier and more at peace and more at equanimity in the mundane and just observing it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's really, and like I still want to like, dude, don't get me wrong. I'll still take a test of acid and see what happens. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm still that cat, but like, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there's something very cool about just this experience. Like even in the worst of the worst, when you're just like praying to God on the toilet with like horrific, stomach problems. And it's like kind of funny. Like if I am a part of God, like why did God choose to have this fucking experience? But then it's just like, it's cool. Like, I don't know.
Because then you come out of it and you realize this, but whenever you're having that in the moment, you realize all the times in your life you took for granted health. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. You're like, I would do anything to just not feel this way right now.
And just coming out of that, you feel like $1,000,000 once it's over. Like I remember whenever I did combo, dude, the frog poison, I did it for the first time this past fall. and the lady facilitator gave me 7 gates, which apparently is a decent size, like first dose or whatever. And I purged for like 5 or 6 hours, dude. Like there, it was like a kind of like, it was like they had like seen purges like that too often, that lasting that long. Like they were kind of surprised, and like I guess I had a lot of demons in me to work out. But dude, like it was
Damn.
5 or 6 hours of like hell, like true hell. Like I like, you know that feeling when you're sick and you're vomiting, of like your stomach's cramping. It was like that times 10, just nonstop. And then I'd vomit and puke and shit, and I'd get like 3 seconds of relief, and then right back to this fucking hell space where I was sweating, my face was swelled up. I was like, but dude, once it was over, once it was over 5 or 6 hours later, it really kind of felt like a rebirth. I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just happy to be here, dude. Um,
Yeah, and just like
yeah.
pure bliss and appreciation.
Yeah, and so even if there was nothing that happened at the physiological level with peptides and things like that, and cleansing or purging or whatever, which I think there was this massive moment of duality that offered me perspective. That, you know what I'm saying? That I was
Mm-hmm.
grateful for sure. And I think like a lot of people can reflect on different moments in their life when they've also experienced this as well too. And I feel like we're both kind of becoming like a psychedelic Jesus right now in this podcast, and should
I know, I know.
probably stop giving people advice, because we're not
Yeah,
what
I
to take
know.
advice from. But
Yeah, none of this is advice. It's just
yeah,
personal realizations, I guess.
yeah,
And I don't know if anyone finds it beneficial to hear that, then listen
yeah,
in.
yeah, absolutely.
One thing I do want to get back to,
Mm-hmm.
just for the sake of the gate program discussion, is
Yeah.
uh, Greer. We didn't
Yes.
fully dive into Greer yet, and
Okay.
I would like to lay that out for people, in the hopes that other people have experiences that they can contribute to this,
Mm-hmm.
because it's very difficult to find evidence like we've talked about. But I've had multiple people come forward with strikingly similar stories of getting to a certain point in the gate program where they were actively being used in these meditation processes, in sensory deprivation tanks. They were being given mysterious injections of medications. And that was the point in their program where Dr. Stephen Greer got brought in,
Mm.
allegedly, to assess them and facilitate certain things. This all happened in like late 80s, early 90s into the 2000s, predominantly on the West Coast, a lot of like the Pacific Northwest, like Oregon, Washington, California area, which is supposedly where he was living at the time and had a career as some sort of physician. Although evidence on that is non-existent, as I have done hours of research trying to figure out this man's life, and I can't find a lick of evidence that he was ever a physician at all, which is a little concerning. But uh, there are multiple people that have come forward, and one person in particular had the most detailed experience where, starting in like kindergarten, she would be given these medications, forced to go into a sensory deprivation tank. Greer was directing the process, sort of like, if anyone knows the show Stranger Things, he was essentially Papa in this scenario.
Yeah.
And he was having this child remote view certain locations. And one of the locations that they remember specifically was a secret military base where they were to observe uh, crash retrieval UFOs and things of that nature. And that was like what she was doing in her public education through the GATE program with Stephen Greer at the helm. And one interesting thing that I discovered about this whole case that was presented to me in this story was the location of where this took place happened right next to a state observatory, so like a, you know, like a star observatory. And this person was
Interesting.
right, and so this person was also involved in a religious cult that has strong ties to Freemasonry. She remembers a cult like ceremony that took place where she was brought to this observatory in the middle of the night with everyone wearing their like traditional dressed up like the cult clothing, like if she was going to a church. And she has no memories of what happened after that, but she remembers it specifically because her parents never allowed her to go to the observatory. And it was very weird because her parents had to go to some like event that night. And then all of a sudden she was being taken to the observatory in the middle of the night with like a small group of people. And she doesn't remember what happened after that. But also of note, this area where this was all taking place is right next to, I think it was an island that is a hotbed of UFO activity. And it was actually the first ever documented instance of this Men in Black group, where there was allegedly a downed UFO craft. And then these government officials dressed in black suits and ties came in and cleaned everything up. Like this was the first ever conspiracy theory about this Men in Black group. That was what the movies were inspired of. This was the first instance of it. And it happened literally like right next to this town where this person was being forced to remote view alien crafts and stuff, but with Dr. Stephen Greer. So I know that was a lot, but yeah, it's hard to ignore.
And the observatory, as observatories themselves are like, they're, kind of like ancient technologies, similar to like pyramids or something like that. Right. There's they're usually put in places where there's much clearer sort of headway into the cosmos. That's really interesting. Sort of like aspect of
I think it was located in like there's these places across the country called dark parks, which is like there's regulations against any sort of light pollution. And I actually happened to live relatively close to when we went there, and we got like a cabin near there, and it is remarkable what the sky looks like in a place like that where light pollution is outlawed. And like even if you go to the dark park and like go use telescopes and stuff, all lights are banned. Like if you have a flashlight, you have to have a red filter on it. It's very strict and interesting. No headlights on cars, things like that. But the results are spectacular. You can see more stars than you've ever imagined. Unless you've ever traveled out to the desert or something like that. It's very similar. But I'm pretty sure this observatory was located in an area like that. But yeah, that's just kind of an interesting tidbit.
I've seen on a couple of different cruises before, I've went out and looked at the stars in the middle of the ocean at night. And that's been like the few times there's been a few other times where I've gotten to see like pretty good stars and stuff, but mainly been on the middle of the ocean. I've gotten the best views. And it's really like when you see it too, it's like, damn, like if I was like a caveman or a primitive person, once again, you'd be trying to find ways in your own vernacular to articulate what this thing is that you're observing and interfacing with every night and stuff like that. And you can see and feel how the stars and the cosmos and all of that became such a source of like probably mystical inspiration, and just like I'm sure it was just mysterious to them in general in a lot of ways.
For sure. And it's crazy to me how few humans now in our society have access to that. Like I take it for granted so often because I live up in the mountains now. Like I have incredible night skies. I can see so many stars and it is gorgeous. And we were just on vacation in Florida, like we were talking about, and dude, I forget, like I lived in Southern Florida for like a little bit of time, and I totally forgot how like shitty the sky is. I mean, it's gorgeous there. Like it's always sunny and there's nice clouds at night, but it feels like daytime 24/7 compared to where I live. Like every night we were out there, I was like, dude, like there is not a single star in sight. It's just this weird glow all the time.
It's like hot and humid and glowing. Yeah.
Right. There's never any actual darkness, and it is so unsettling. And then to come home and I'm like taking the garbage out, and it's like, holy crap, there are so many stars here. Like I didn't see one of them in Florida.
I hope a bear doesn't come get me while I'm taking my trash out.
Right. Yeah, there's a different set of risks for sure with where I live, but it's very who knows what kind of impact that has on
Mhm.
humanity as a whole when they've lost that sense of perspective.
Yeah, or psychologically, yeah, what does that do for us as a whole? It's a very valid question, and I think it does probably do something. You know what I'm saying? I don't know exactly what that is, but it's something. But
Can't be good.
yeah, dude. So, is there anything else that we need to touch base on in this episode today? I mean, you're going to be back on at some point for sure, but
Trying to think of all the things that I've
oh,
been.
there is
Yeah,
one
yeah,
thing I want to ask you about. I might have to take another pee break real quick. If that's okay. Be
oh
right
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Okay. So, the thing I really wanted to ask you about was you have been talking to a hypnotherapist, correct?
Yes.
And she has been helping develop a program to help people remember what happened to them in the GATE program, correct?
Yeah, this is gonna go off the
You,
rails really fast. I'm gonna be honest with you. This is
I'm
gonna be the
so here
craziest
for it.
portion of the podcast by far. I'm
I'm
kind of
so here for
I'm
it, dude.
sad that it happened at the very end. Yeah. So full transparency, I've just been busy and I haven't been able to keep up with that at all. Like I only was able to do one session. We had a lot of different meetings leading up to my session, of just like there's a kind of a whole process that is involved where it's almost like a debrief of my own personal life and past traumas, even not related to the GATE program, just to get it all out on the table, because this person is going to kind of be tinkering with your subconscious and she wants to know anything that she might come across. um, and so there was a lot of different meetings that we had leading up to the session, and also kind of working back and forth on how to specifically target the GATE program using these hypnotherapies and things like that. So, and she is amazing. She's incredible. She went through the program herself and ended up learning these different modalities and getting certified in stuff specifically for that reason of trying to remember what happened to her. And so I went through a session. I wasn't able to get deeply hypnotized. I think there's a lot of different factors to that. Obviously, she even said herself, like, it usually takes 3 sessions to really have someone fully trust you to the point where you can be hypnotized fully. Having said that, I did have some very concerning memories pop up during my session that I haven't talked about,
Mm.
because it sounds like the most batshit crazy things that you could talk about. But apparently, this is a thing that people have experienced. Have you ever heard of the 20 and back program?
20 and back. I don't think
So this
so.
is a super tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that there is this very deep black government program called 20 and back, and that's just kind of like the conspiracy theory term. I don't, who the fuck knows what the actual project was called, if it exists.
Yeah.
But basically they would identify these psychically talented children, recruit them into a program where you would be able to sort of like time travel, and they would utilize you for 20 years, whether in the secret space program or other various different things that they were, you know, doing. And then at the end of your 20-year contract, they would send you back to the moment where you started the program with having no memories of what you did. So like back in time, essentially, which is a lot to take in. I recognize that when I first heard of it, I was like, this is stupid. But then
stupid.
Right. Like it's such a like Star Trek out there concept to really buy into. You know
Is
what I mean?
anything off? Is anything off the table at this point, though? Like,
Right, and that's the thing. Like, I like to entertain all different possibilities. So I'm not. My gut reaction was definitely like, oh, this is pretty funny. Like, there's no way this is real. But then I did my hypnotherapy session, and I actually was able to unlock a lot of memories that I had of the GATE program. One of the most impactful ones to me was I remembered being taken to this like secret backroom supply closet thing. It was like in the science lab. It was like me and maybe another kid, and we got taken back with one of our like GATE instructors, and we're being made to do this testing that I didn't understand, but it was like in a supply closet. And I distinctly remember that. And I had no memories of that until I went through this session. And then it all came flooding back. And more details actually came after that session where I was able to sort of further unlock this memory. But that was super interesting to me because I've had other people confirm that since then. So just kind of odd. And then there was another experience that I remembered while under hypnosis of being the classrooms where it was like a big room and they would have like that wall divider and you'd have like two classes. So I was in one of my GATE classes and they took down the wall divider and there was only a couple of us in this classroom. And I remember them wheeling in this like weird old television screen type thing, almost like very retro, almost like the green hues kind of a screen. And they were like hooking kids up to it, almost like an EEG type situation and making us do different things. That memory is super hazy, but it is something that came out of this session, which I'm, obviously thankful to have unlocked that memory. It's hard for me to really understand or put any context to it, but at least it's more than I had going into it of what actually happened to me during the GATE program.
You sound like it's kind of like an onion. You're starting to peel back some of the layers,
Right. And these things are so compartmentalized, and who knows what techniques they used to prevent remembering it. But then I had another experience under this hypnotherapy where I remembered being on a spaceship. Like I wasn't inside the spaceship. I was outside of the spaceship on a spacewalk, and I had this like suit on. I was with another person who was training me, and he was showing me this weird weapon thing that he had, and it was like, it almost looked like a golden flashlight, and you would hit a button and this like red plasma type blade thing. It's not like I don't want to say it was like a lightsaber, because it was like almost like an arc, like an electrical arc, but it formed this red sort of plasma knife thing, and he was trying to show me how to operate it. And then as I was going through that memory, she uses this technique to kind of walk you back in time to understand how you got there. And that's when I jumped to this other memory of being in this like weird lab setting, and there was this like weird bed thing with a lid that I was being made to climb into, almost like a cryo tank like you see in sci-fi shit. And I was like, as a kid, being made to get into this thing. So like I don't know, maybe this was all manufactured in my head, maybe this was just from watching TV and it somehow creeped into this hypnotherapy session. I don't know. But all I know is I was not prepared or expecting to have any sort of memories that would even remotely confirm this existence of a 20 and back program or some of the more crazy things that people have claimed to experience in connection with the gate program. I don't know. I don't know how to account for that. I don't know. I haven't really processed that truthfully. But it happened. I recalled that memory. So who knows what that means?
Have you have you ever read the book Ender's Game?
I've seen the movie, which is a pretty sad thing to
Okay.
say, but I am
Yeah.
familiar with the plot at least.
Yeah. All of this reminds me a little bit of that book and the basic plot of that book. And it was more like of a normalized, above board aspect of their society, but they do these wide sweeping nets for kids that displayed certain levels of proficiency, whatever. Maybe it's, skills, and they usher them through these programs. And this one particular little boy in particular, Ender, ended up being really special, and he climbed the ranks really fast. And before he knew it, they had utilized his life force and skills and psychic abilities and all these things to like conquer a completely different universe. Like he didn't even realize he had done it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really, and then they just kind of like tried to send him back to like living a normal life. And of course, he never lived a normal life and things. But yeah, it's feeling very Ender's Gamey with a lot of this, dude. And that's the 20 and back is really interesting. Have you ever? I'm sure you've seen the movie Interstellar, right?
Yes.
Yeah, dude, Interstellar. You remember it's one of the saddest aspects of that movie, but how he, it is like the core of the movie, the plot, but he got caught in time there, and time was moving really fast back home, and he couldn't
Mm-hmm.
get out. And there's these instances where he was caught throughout time, leaving himself little Easter eggs, trying to be like, hey, bro, and shake himself in the right direction
Yep.
and things like that. But yeah, it's feeling a bit like, I forget how I was going to correlate that to Interstellar, but
But I think that
yeah.
all those examples of media,
Mm-hmm.
like that's one of the things that I am coming to understand, or is kind of flirting with this
Yeah.
idea that I don't know how many new ideas we actually get. Like all these, like I don't know. Like I just read a couple of weeks ago, Stephen King's The Institute, which is essentially about the GATE program, or like Stranger Things. Like there's so many movies and television shows and books that are just like a interesting twist on a core truth. I don't
Mm.
know.
And they
I
become
don't.
popular and they leverage that
Right.
core truth to become popular. And they're like,
Right. It
they know it'll
resonates
be,
with people because
yeah,
it's a
they know it'll
real
be
thing. It's a
successful.
real aspect of our reality, and they just kind of
Yeah.
put a Hollywood spin on it or something like that. But I'm not sure how many truly original ideas there exist in media. I think that it's just sort of repurposing core truths about our reality, and that we're limited humans. We only can speak about our experiences and draw from this collective human consciousness of other people's experiences. And I think that's where these ideas are coming from, and we're accidentally disclosing real information about what's going on, maybe without even knowing it. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's not really like a fully fleshed out idea of mine yet, but that is something that that's a pattern that I'm recognizing, is that so much of our media is shockingly based on even the most far-fetched concepts are like kind of true. It's kind of brushing on an element that is really going on.
Yeah. And if similar to like the whole gate discussion that we're having, right? Let's be the devil's advocate for a second. Not that I think this was going on, but let's say you and I are all completely wrong about this or missing something. It's but it's extremely popular too, right? This discussion. It, Maybe it's popular because it's playing on at least some core of truths, right? Of at least, and we can look at, there is instances of when we do this as a society, we find special talented children and we nurture and foster these talents. Whether they, like I think about like when I growing up, like I played football, you know what I mean? Like, and like there's some kids who would be really good, and like families would invest a lot of money into like getting their kid and a lot of time and energy into like getting their kid really good and helping their kid climb the ranks to be a good football player, because they thought that, and a lot of that maybe was selfish reasons, but maybe they thought it was better for the collective as a whole. And like countries do this with kids and the Olympics and things like that. And like, so at the base level of reality, we do this as parents and as a society as a whole. We kind of usher kids along like this. You see this with child actors as well too, all the time. So it's really not far-fetched to think, for all the reasons that we've laid out, that there's been some sort of like spiritual, psychic ability nurturing of children within our society as well too, man. And yeah, I really want to hear more about your sort of unfolding and updates with the sort of hypnosis side of things with this. And I also want to, I'm curious about like her getting to interact with more people who have been in the GATE program as well and stuff too. Maybe someday I can maybe do some hypnosis stuff with her as well too.
Yeah,
See how
for
that
sure.
plays
I've
out.
been, like you. Obviously, I would recommend you. I've tried to be a little bit selective with who I refer to her, just because I want to make sure that it's legit. Obviously, there's a lot of bad actors that approach me, and a lot of deceitful people who are just trying to have their message read, and things like that. So I'm pretty cautious about who I actually will refer to her for this hypnotherapy. I mean, obviously, obviously, I trust you, and I know that you're being, wholeheartedly truthful and stuff. And I feel like you would probably get a lot of benefit out of something like that. But it's definitely hard to know who's being sincere, who's telling the truth, and who's trying to throw a wrench into things and disrupt the narrative. Because obviously, as
Mm.
evidenced by the censorship, like there is huge pushback on this. There is
Yeah.
definitely people are squirming in their chairs right now who were orchestrating these programs, and they are not happy about the fact that so many people are waking up and talking to each other.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, it's definitely, it's a little complicated, but I do think that there will be very good things that come out of it.
Yeah. And I'm going to need everybody who's listening to this right now to go ahead and in the comment section on YouTube and wherever you're listening to this at, just start tagging Sean Ryan. We're going to like massively just spam tag him and confront him with this. Bro, we want to get Jake on your podcast. We need to really distribute this message and start figuring some of this shit out, bring it to the surface level. But yeah, dude, I think just keep pushing, dude. I mean, like as we were describing earlier on the episode, you might have to switch up and find different ways to express it and stuff, but you will. You're creative and stuff. This is really, I love talking to you in general, but this gate thing has been a really, really interesting little beacon for me and you to hone in on together and stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's like living in a movie, and it's not one that I wanted to live in or be a part of. You know what I mean? It's like a weird horror dystopian movie that I found myself in. But yeah, like the more that you dig and the more that you uncover and the more people you talk to, that it's hard to ignore this pattern that seems to be shaping up, where there was
Mm-hmm.
some really insidious things happening for a long, long time, and the primary target of that was children. And like,
Right.
to know that not only did that happen, but you were directly involved in it is kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
Yeah, agreed. And I know it's going to sound very airy fairy and hopeful, but I do feel like we have to sort of bring it to the surface level to be able to sort of address it and to quote unquote heal it as a collective or whatever it is. And hopefully
Right.
this is a part of that and stuff like that. But yeah, dude.
Okay, hold on. Before we wrap up,
Yeah.
the last thing that I need people to know, if you are still listening and interested in this, I strongly caution everyone against using Robert Monroe's gateway tapes. That is a huge player in this. There's like everything, there's a lot of layers to this. Um, all signs point to that being a bad thing. I think that is another trap that was put up there to catch us. And even like one of the people who was working with the Monroe Institute was
Mhm.
Joe McMoneagle, one of
Yeah.
the
Explain to people really quickly what the gateway tapes are for people who don't know, because I think
Right.
this is a really important thing to
So
address here.
Robert Monroe was this businessman who was allegedly having these out of body experiences, and he approached all of his colleagues and laid it all out for them. And he's like, "Am I going crazy?" And he was evaluated by psychology people, psychiatrists, and they all said he's not crazy and that he should keep exploring this phenomenon. And so through his out of body experiences, he developed this series of hypnosis tapes to help induce that experience in other people. The validity of that story is questioned. There's some evidence that he was actually huffing glue to achieve out of body experiences. His colleagues were associated directly with MK Ultra projects, and then the other piece of it that I don't think I mentioned before was, so one of the whistleblowers on Monarch programming, MK Ultra, and all of that. One of the ways that he was programmed, he's this guy that also was involved in the cult that I grew up in. He was actually brought to it. So the church in Jehovah's Witnesses cult is called the Kingdom Hall, and he was brought to the Kingdom Hall in the off hours and went through a Monroe Institute program at the church. So like he was being brainwashed with hypnosis tapes by Robert Monroe from people through the Monroe Institute at his Freemasonic church. So it's like there's too many bad things that keep coming up in my research of this topic where it's like, please, for the love of God, stay away from them. And that's coming from someone who's used them for years. Like I dreamt of going to the Monroe Institute someday. And also, side point, one of the things that initially convinced me that Sean Ryan was a bad actor was leaked text messages from this guy Gray, where one of the people that worked on Sean Ryan's podcast was a victim of Monarch programming. And when he started to wake up to that fact, Sean Ryan was trying to get him back to the Monroe Institute for a week's worth of programs and sessions to re-indoctrinate him. So like there's a lot of bad stuff going on right now. Yeah, I don't know how to really put that so that we don't
somebody
get
like
deplatformed, but
somebody like Dr. Greer or Sean Ryan who is in this, like, what do you think that experience is like for them? Why do you think they're doing it? Is it because they're just actually bad? Is it because they've been programmed so heavily? Do you when you think about someone like Sean Ryan, right? It's like, yeah, he's quote unquote ex-CIA. He's been in the CIA. He's been in the system. But like, do you not think that man has blurps of like, oh, this like these overlords who control and tell me what I say, and I don't know,
I
do you think
think
he
that
justifies it to himself? Do you think Dr. Greer justified the whole like thing? I'm sure they do.
100%, and it is a cult. Like
Mhm.
this I don't want to say that patriotism is a cult, but in a sense it is. And these
Yeah.
truly patriotic people who believe that their government, their land that they live in, is sovereign. It deserves to be ruling over the planet, and it must be protected at all costs. If you live with that point of view, then there are a lot of concessions that you can make and kind of detours of morality to support that. And it's exactly
Mhm.
like being in a cult. Like one of the things that is very odd about being in a lot of cults, specifically the one that I grew up in, is obviously lying is forbidden, lying is bad, until you are lying to support the cult and its narrative. Then it is encouraged. And that is not blatantly said, but it is fully understood by all of its members that you are fully allowed to lie about the cult and its teachings and its leadership for the good of the cult and the cause. And I think that that is the same mentality that these people have, where it is a necessary
Mm.
evil to them to be able
Yeah.
to support their patriotism and their alleged sovereignty that this government has developed into. And so that's why I think they justify it. I think there's a lot of programming, a lot of thought control that goes into it, and there's a lot of moving parts. And I think maybe a lot of these industry plants or sort of thought leaders directing people in that direction probably have undergone some sort of mind control steering their direction as well. So they don't necessarily have full autonomy of their self-reflection by design. But I think that even the people at the tippy top, the people who are fully aware of everything going on, orchestrating it all, they probably have a sense of justice in what they are doing, because they're looking at it from a very different perspective than what we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the average person, like I described earlier, would look at it as you were without consent doing weird shit to my child. That's what the average person would look at it as, or to the children of the tribe. You know what I'm saying? Whereas someone like that in that position has compartmentalized it into some sort of way as I am doing this for the betterment of the collective, and there's going to be necessary evils along the way. But hey, man, somebody's got to do it, and I'm fucking Sean Ryan, and people just don't understand global 5D chess like I do politics.
Right,
fucking
right.
dude. Like, and the more I've tried to understand global politics and all of it, like it is the more I am convinced that nobody knows what the fuck is going on or is like fully in control. And like, so a lot of these like systems and programs and things that sprout out, it's like, oh, like I think a lot of y'all just got swept up in it. And yeah, there is some people at the top, things like that for sure. But a lot of people just get swept up in the fucking momentum of it. You know what I'm saying? And there's
And they're all
this,
just humans. They're all
yeah,
humans. That's the thing. Like, there isn't, even if there is some secret Illuminati organization running everything, it's still all dumb humans at the tippy top of it all. And they all have egos. They all have blind sides. Like, you can't escape that. And unless there truly is some like secret reptile based infiltration, you know what I'm saying? Unless there is like truly some far out alien deception going on and they truly have like a higher capacity of intelligence and intuition that humans aren't capable of, that's a different ballgame. But if it is truly just humans ruling humans, then we're all so convinced of our own bullshit that no one has the full picture. It's impossible.
100%. 100%, man. Oh, this is so good. I've loved this conversation, dude. Is there anything else we should leave the
I
people with today?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think we covered most of the new updates that I've received. I'm sure more will come out as I talk to more people and investigate things. But yeah, those are the main concerning points that I've discovered with some of these prominent names in UFO and alien disclosure actually being deeply involved in the experimentation of children for decades. And that's, I don't really know how to tackle that problem on my own besides just like sharing it with people, and hopefully more and more people will start to question it and turn on them in some way. Like, hopefully we could kind of detract from their following and not give them so much power and influence. um Not to say that they won't just prop up a different podcast or person, but it's I think it's important for people to be aware of that. Like, these people can't be trusted. And I'm not saying that I like don't watch their stuff. Like, I still will watch episodes of these things occasionally, but from a very different perspective, where it's like, all right, let's see what the propaganda is today. Let's try and understand why they're moving the narrative in this direction, rather than like
Yeah.
taking it at face value, or thinking that it's credible. But it's more so like hearing out a known liar to
Hmm.
see like, okay, why are you lying about that? What are you hiding? And I feel like, people should be watching these things with that in mind.
Yeah. And this goes a lot deeper. Something like the Sean Ryan rabbit hole, the gate rabbit hole, goes a lot deeper than just some like the surface level research you can do. But one thing, and that's where I promise this isn't a plug. I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that, but it's a service that I have been using and really like. It's called Ground News. And
Mm.
it's now with all of these things, you have to take into consideration that, well, maybe they did something with their algorithm on the back end or whatever, but it pulls with these different topics and things like that. So like you know, especially right now with all the new administration and Doge, and there'll be a new fucking news release every day that's being covered by the different ends of the political spectrum. And whatever you're hearing about that particular subject on, whether you think you're not biased or you are biased, if you're hearing about it from that particular perspective and that's your one brushing up against it, that heavily influences how you think about that. But of course, you can keep in perspective that that's their perspective and try and formulate your own. You know, but what Ground News does is they pull together all these different websites and sources and shows you the full spectrum of like, well, here's what the really far left is reporting on it and saying about it, and here's what the really far right is reporting on it and saying about it. And so, yeah, I've been kind of like referring to that every now and then with some of these things, and it's really, really fucking interesting to see how things get politicized in general and pushed and used for a certain narrative. And so kind of like you were just describing, it's this observing of it, and not that like watching it is consuming it means that you're bought in, but it's like you're just interested by like, why are you pushing this side of the narrative in this way and utilizing it in this way? And there's an incentive behind that, and there's motive behind that, intentions, you know. It's all really interesting and simultaneously telling for a lot of these podcasts or news networks or whatever it is, you know. But yeah, dude. Yeah. But so tell people where they can find you at, Jake, where they can digest some of your stuff.
I am JakeKnowsNothing on everything. Primarily post to TikTok all the time. Occasionally, I will compile stuff and put it on YouTube. I would like to start doing YouTube more regularly, as it seems like I can talk about these things more freely on there for right now. I'm on Instagram. Don't really use it that much. Kind of hate the Meta platform, unfortunately. I don't really like any of these platforms, but it feels like a necessary evil, just like watching the news. But yeah, I'm JakeKnowsNothing on everything. And yeah, you can find all the random crazy things that I talk about on there.
Yeah. Go check them out, guys. Thank you so much for coming on, dude. I love you. We're going to have him back on here soon, everybody. Jake's like one of the best guests of the Launchpad Podcast ever.
Thank you, bro. Love being here.
Much love, brother.